Harry Potter. What is the appeal of this series to a child versus an adult? Harry Potter's impact. Since the release of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in 1997, The Boy Who Lived has had an incredible cultural impact on society. Much of both the millennial generation and Generation Z grew up reading and watching the series as children. However, it did not stop there. Even as adults, many millennials and older Gen Z still consider themselves Potterheads and identify themselves by their claimed Hogwarts house. These books and movies still have a large appeal to those generations, even as adults. Why is this? What about Harry Potter, a series written for children, appeals to those same children even when they grow into adulthood? This is the question that we will be looking at today. The first aspect of this series that we will discuss is the themes. Over the course of its 7 books and 8 movies, this series touches on a multitude of ideas or themes that range from very simple to deep, dark, and complex. We will begin with the more childish themes. Good versus evil. This theme is very present and very evident throughout the whole series. Good versus evil is a very basic human idea that even children are able to understand. The child reading these books is able to see the difference between the good guys and the bad guys, and how the pursuit of good brings a person joy and fulfillment, while the pursuit of evil only brings destruction and sadness. Love. This theme is explored in many ways throughout the series. Love is explored through Harry's connection with his friends and his family. We see that love is what gives Harry's life meaning and a purpose. Meanwhile, Voldemort, who has no love for anyone, is ultimately empty and unfulfilled. Teamwork. While Harry may be the chosen one, it is made very clear that he could not do everything on his own. The climax of the first book is a prime example of this. In order for Harry to make it all the way to the Sorcerer's Stone, he needed both Hermione and Ron to help him get through the different challenges that were put in his way. Harry could not have gotten through every single one of those by himself. It took teamwork and determination. Fear. Fear and, on the other side of the coin, courage are key players in Harry's journey. Harry knows what he has to do, but it scares him to death. Yet he does it anyway because he knows it's the right thing. This all culminates in his ultimate sacrifice and the Deathly Hallows. Although it scares him, Harry has the courage to give his life for his friends because he knows it's the only thing that will stop Voldemort. While all of these themes are relevant to both children and adults, those are the themes that children would most easily grasp in reading this series. But there are a few far more mature themes that readers can only grow to understand as they get older. Death. Death plays a very big part in this series. This story begins with death. People rejoicing over Voldemort's supposed demise while mourning over the death of James and Lily Potter. Voldemort's arc revolves mostly around his desire to escape death. This desire drives him so mad that he is willing to commit atrocities in order to split his soul and remain virtually immortal. Conversely, Harry, over the course of the story, comes face to face with death and ultimately comes to realize that death is inevitable and not to be feared or avoided. Trauma. This theme is prevalent through the entire series, mainly dealing with Harry. Growing up orphaned in an abusive home leaves him with a plethora of baggage that he must carry. As the story progresses, Harry loses people close to him and has close encounters with death, and he must learn how to cope with the knowledge that he cannot escape the pain that life brings at times. He has a few people in his life who will help him through dealing with death and pain. Luna Lovegood, whose mother committed suicide when she was young, helps him understand that your pain does not have to define you. Remus, who had to deal with being a werewolf his whole life, helps Harry to understand that isolation will only make things worse. Isolation is best portrayed in the 5th book of the series, The Order of the Phoenix. Throughout this book, Harry is dealing with an immense amount of pressure and fear. This fear has driven him to isolate himself from his friends. He's become closed off and refuses to communicate with what he is feeling. This isolation seeds a lot of contention between Harry and his friends and makes himself more and more vulnerable to Voldemort's infiltration of his mind. Only at the end of the book does Harry come to realize that communicating and leading on his friends is the only way that he can defeat Voldemort. Corruption. Lastly, corruption is a huge theme in the last 4 books of this series. During this time, we come to understand the Ministry of Magic and how it works as a government force. Like many governments, the leaders fall to corruption when put under pressure of facing an external threat. They deny the return of Voldemort until it becomes undeniable, at which point it is almost too late to deal with the threat. The press manipulates the people to trusting the government's advice. We alternatively see the fruition of this in the last book when Voldemort takes complete control of the Ministry of Magic, which easily could have been avoided had the Ministry not denied his return. Next, we are going to discuss the story elements. Next, we are going to talk about the story elements. These are a bit more basic than the themes of the series, but are still certain pieces of the series that might appeal to a child versus an adult. The first element that might appeal to a child is magic. Obviously, the whole series is centered around the world of magic and wizardry. This particular element gives a child a sense of wide-eyed wonder. Learning the new concepts and delving into the world of magic is a highly attractive part of this story for children. The fact that this series takes place in a school is also relatable to children, because all children have to go through school, and they know the mundane day-to-day life of classes and homework. Reading about wizard children going to a wizard boarding school, where all they have to learn about is charms and potions and mythical creatures, might draw a child in, as it contrasts their normal, dull day-to-day life. Fantasy. This element covers the different fantastical aspects of the world, such as the existence of mythical creatures. Griffins, unicorns, mermaids, goblins, werewolves. Nearly any fantasy creature and trope imaginable is very real within the world of Harry Potter. Finally, escapism. Escapism encompasses all of these elements: school, magic, and fantasy. These have a way of enticing the reader into their world. The world is so well developed in the way that it works that it's easy for a child to completely lose themselves in these books as they read. Some elements that may have more of an appeal to an adult readership would include these. Politics. Through the last few books in the series, politics plays a huge role in the plot. The conflict between the Ministry of Magic and those on Harry's side causes so much division and contention between the characters and the different facets of this world. It's gritty, and it reflects very starkly the state of politics in our world. Lore. Lore differs from fantasy in that the lore of Harry Potter goes much deeper than the fantastical elements. Lore can include history, rules of magic, backgrounds of characters, and places. There's so much lore behind the Harry Potter series that many adult Harry Potter fans have devoted much time to understanding every element and facet of the lore in this series. Power struggle. Power struggle is similar to politics. It is something that reflects many readers' everyday experiences in life. Though maybe on a much grander scale in the books and movies, power still plays a large role in many people's decision-making and motivations in day-to-day life. Many adults may find it intriguing to read about the power struggles of these fictional characters and where those decisions lead them. Justice. Finally, justice is also an element that adults may be attracted to. This may not be an element that you would first think of when it comes to Harry Potter, but when you dig down to it, a longing for justice is something that entices many readers to keep reading the series. A longing for the Ministry and the Wizarding world to show Harry Potter the respect that he deserves and to believe what he's saying. A longing for Voldemort to face the fate that he has set up for himself. A longing for Muggle-borns to be fully respected within the Wizarding community. These are all important parts of justice in the Harry Potter world. Finally, we will move on to the lessons that both children and adults can take away from the series. Our children's lessons will be much more simplistic in the long run, but they are still very much important in building their character as they grow older. The series teaches that love and friendship can get you through almost anything. This is evident through most every moment of Harry Potter's life. He's faced with so many trials and heartbreaks, but is only able to get through them with his friends and those he considers family. The story teaches children to always fight for what's right, even when it's very difficult. The characters in the series are faced with so many daunting tasks that would almost seem impossible and are incredibly scary, but they face them anyway boldly because they know that they should. This series shows that it's okay to be sad and angry and hurt. For a period of time in the series, Harry goes through a lot of negative emotions, and trying to push them away or bottle them up only made it worse. And it came out in pushing his friends away and becoming weak. Negative emotions are okay. Finally, the series teaches that you cannot do everything on your own. Even Harry Potter, the chosen one, needed help from his friends, from Dumbledore, from the other professors to do things that he needed to do. No one is able to do everything by themselves. The lessons that an adult can learn from the series are a little bit deeper and more philosophical. The series teaches that death is inevitable. It's how you live that counts. Voldemort tried to avoid death in so many ways, but he ultimately ended up wasting his entire life away by doing so. By the end, he was an empty corpse of the man he could have been. The series teaches admitting when you're wrong is usually better than living in denial. The Minister of Magic in books 4 and 5 was in utter denial that Voldemort had come back. Despite all of the obvious red flags, he denied and denied and denied until he finally was faced with the ugly truth. This ultimately cost him his entire livelihood as well as any respect the Wizarding world had for him. This series shows that courage is facing your fears, not the absence of fear. Every character in the story had many moments where they were rattled with fear, but they knew it was what was right and they did it anyway, for the greater good. A lot of times the right thing is the hard thing, and we have to have the courage to do what's right despite our fear. Finally, the series shows that just because everyone says or believes something does not make it true. We see this through many of the last few books in the series. There are so many rumors circulating and lies being perpetuated by the media and the ministry that every normal wizard would believe them. But we know that just because this is what the narrative was being pushed, that does not make it the truth. In conclusion, although this series is generally labeled as children's literature, the books grow up with the readers. Underneath every surface-level theme written for children to understand is a deeper and far more mature theme that the reader will only grow to comprehend with time. The readers never outgrow these stories because there is always a new lesson to be learned and theme to be explored. The children who first picked up these books for a way of escape can continue to pick up these books into adulthood to stir their minds. Finally, I would like to leave you with a final quote from one of my favorite authors, C.S. Lewis. When I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I am 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up.